The comment of the Coalition spokesperson for Indigenous Australians that they aren't experiencing, quote, the ongoing negative impacts of colonisation has been slammed by Aboriginal community leaders, psychologists and doctors. As we reported on PM yesterday, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price made the comment in an address to the National Press Club. Her critics are pointing to what they say is widespread evidence of the devastating consequences of colonisation for Indigenous communities, not only here but around the world. Rachel Hayter has more.
When Gamilaroi woman Mary Kennedy was a little girl, she didn't understand why her parents were always scared.
We were sort of told that we couldn't go too far away from where our parents were during the time at the mission, and I couldn't understand the reason why we was told to come home early was because they feared that the welfare would take them. It was a fear of taking their children away.
In her northern New South Wales hometown of Walgett, the memory of the stolen generations lingers.
That's another fear that stays with you.
Trauma is insidious, and a psychological phenomenon Nyama woman Dr. Tracy Westerman is very familiar with. She's the Managing Director of Indigenous Psychological Services and the founding director of the Westerman Gillia Institute for Indigenous Mental Health. She's worked with Aboriginal people for 25 years.
If you have trauma in your background, there's about 30% of trauma is genetic, so that is something that's just bad luck. If you have a parent who has trauma, it increases the vulnerability to experience, to inherit trauma-based reactions. Then there's a biological contribution, which essentially means if you have a mum, for example, who has trauma, then it increases the likelihood that you'll develop trauma in terms of passing on through biological vulnerability through in utero. It actually starts that early. You're up to 3 times as likely to develop trauma yourself.
Dr. Westerman says a person's environment also plays a critical role.
So what we know, I guess, is that up to 70% of trauma in Aboriginal people is accounted for by discrimination and racist events. So that's epidemiologically and scientifically proven.
And research shows when an emotional response to an event is invalidated, it's more likely to stick around longer.
The big one, though, however, that we refer to as a post-trauma variable is that trauma is denied.
To hold such a press conference and to make these statements is deeply saddening, because what it does is it denies the existence, it denies the history, it denies the lived experience of so many Australians, hundreds of thousands of people in this country.
Like Dr. Westerman, Ued Noongar man Dr. Jason King is extremely disappointed by Jacinta Nampijinpa Price's comments that colonisation has not left any lasting impacts. He's a GP working in an Aboriginal community in Yarrabah in far north Queensland.
We have a rheumatic heart disease rate, a medical condition which has been eliminated from the broader Australian population to a large extent, that is 100 times the average in this country. And we have diabetes, we have heart disease, we have suicide, and we have these problems not because of the choices of the people who live in these communities, not because they are somehow unwilling to step forward and take ownership and to hold onto their future, but because of the choices, the policies of the past into the future.
Aranda Kalkadoon filmmaker and Yes campaigner Rachel Perkins is also disputing the Shadow Indigenous Australians minister's position. She's pointed to Indigenous people's lives post-colonisation mirrored across continents.
I was surprised that her view of colonisation is so limited. I mean, there is no mistake that First Nations people in Canada, America, New Zealand and Australia all suffer from similar social circumstances, right? That is not a coincidence. That is a result of colonisation. It's not an excuse. It's not a justification for not changing it. But a lot of the things we see are symptomatic of the process of colonisation.
With just 4 weeks to go until the first referendum in 2 decades, only 25% of Australians feel the country is united, and 44% of us believe we're more divided than we were 12 months ago. That's according to the Togetherness Index, a survey of 1,500 people by consultancy Senate SHJ. Head of Social Change, Jodie Wrigley, says the tone of the public conversation around the referendum is driving that split.
Unfortunately, it does appear that the current debate around the voice is compounding that feeling, leaving many people feeling like sort of little room for discussion or middle debate as part of that.
The Australian Electoral Commissioner, Tom Rogers, has asked people to show respect to one another as the campaigns continue and lamented an increase in aggressive behaviour toward the AEC online.
Rachel Hayter reporting.